This is Joseph Phillips. I want to talk with you about managing questions in a timed constrained class. Questions generally mean that people are thinking, that they're involved, and they're considering what you're sharing with them during your lecture and during your demonstrations. It doesn't always mean, though, that people are engaged. It could mean that people are confused, they don't understand what you're saying, or that people are uncertain about the direction or your information that you're giving them in the class. Sometimes questions can have other meanings. You've probably been in a class where an individual asks a hypothetical question or a question about the duration of the activity or the work, where it's really not a question to gain more knowledge, it's a question to help them have an argument or to have a subtle undertone with someone else in the classroom. For example, a person may say, well, if we use this new technology, won't this be less reliable than what we've used in the past? So they're in that example, they're using a question that has some type of an undertone to it, that they're not in love with the technology, so they're using the opportunity to sneak a little jab in. So you have to manage those questions that you want to answer the question, but you also have to look at what the underlying reasoning for the question may be. The goal in your class is to engage learners. And one way to do that is not just for the learners to give you questions, but for you to ask the learner questions. You can engage participants through questions. Expectations at the beginning of the class, though, can help limit unnecessary questions from the learners to you. So for example, if you go over the course outline and what we're going to cover in the class, then it should identify the boundaries of what we will and we will not address. So when an individual asks a question that is outside of those class boundaries, you can say, we're on a time constraint schedule and we don't have time to answer that question in class because it's going to be an in-depth answer. So we will cover that in a future class, or we can talk about that after class. But you want to communicate those boundaries up front so that you and the individual are not put in an awkward scenario of identifying questions that are just outside of the boundaries. Always identify your boundaries, basically what you're going to cover in the class, at the beginning of the class. One approach that a lot of trainers like is to create a question parking lot. A question parking lot is basically an area of your whiteboard or a flip chart that when questions come up during class that aren't related to the current topic, you throw those over in the question parking lot and you'll get to that information later. So it's just a way of identifying questions that aren't part of the course or you're going to cover later in the class. It allows you to keep moving on your current topic. Approach that I like is your personal question valet. So what I do is I'll pass out some 3x5 cards at the beginning of the course. And when individuals have a question that's not relevant, and they can judge if it's relevant or not, they are to write down the question on their 3x5 card. And then I'll allot some time at the end of the day or at lunch or whatnot to address these questions. This helps people keep their own questions on a 3x5 card so that they know this is something I want to ask and maybe I'm going to address it in the lecture and then they can cross it out. And it also helps to limit repetitive questions. So if 4 or 5 people have the same question, as soon as we answer the question once, the other 4 or 5 people can cross off that question from their 3x5 card. So these are just some strategies of how you want to address questions in the classroom to keep the pace and the rhythm of your class moving forward.